The rain didn't fall in Seoul. It needled. It was a cold, metallic drizzle that turned the city's neon into smeared wounds against the night sky. From the back seat of a silent sedan, Dyun watched it without seeing. His knuckle, split and freshly stitched, throbbed against the cool glass. The meeting had been efficient. A warehouse by the docks, a brief exchange of words, a shorter exchange of violence. The accountant would not be skimming from the shipping lanes again. The job was done, the empire secured. Yet the hollow in his chest, vast and familiar, echoed only with the sound of the engine. His phone buzzed, a sterile rectangle of light in the dark. Not Tae-hyun with a follow-up report. It was the live feed from his mother's house. He tapped it open, a nightly ritual of distant guilt. The camera in the main living room showed stillness. Then, a flicker of movement. Not his mother's nurse. A woman with skin like dark honey and a posture of resilient grace was adjusting a blanket over his mother's sleeping form. Christina, the new caregiver from Johannesburg. She'd been there a week. He'd approved the file, the background check, and had deliberately not been home. Vulnerability was a luxury his world punished. Sir. His driver's eyes found him in the rear view. The office. Dyun's gaze stayed on the screen, on the gentle, precise way her hands smoothed the cashmere. No. Home. The mansion was not a home. It was a fortress of polished marble and silence. He entered through the private wing, the one connected to his study, avoiding the main living spaces. But the silence was different tonight. It was softened. A low, melodic hum drifted from the kitchen. A song in a language he didn't know, full of rolling vowels and warmth. He stood in the shadowed hallway, a specter in his own domain, and listened. The hollow in his chest ached differently. He found her at 3:07 a.m. The kitchen, a cavern of stainless steel and cold stone, was bathed in the single warm glow of the oven light. She was seated at the immense island, a textbook open, a cup of tea steaming beside her. She didn't startle when he appeared in the doorway. She looked up, and her eyes held no fear, only a quiet, assessing curiosity. Mr. Lee, you're home late, or early. You're awake, he stated, his voice rough from disuse and the night's work. Your mother was restless. The rain makes her joints ache. I gave her her medication and sat with her until she fell back asleep. She closed her book. Advanced Geriatric Care. My mind was too awake after. I hope the tea is all right. He nodded, a stiff gesture. He should go to his room, to his sanctuary of control. Instead, he moved to the sink, filling a glass with water. The space between them crackled with an unspoken charge. The file said you were the best from that agency. The file said you were a logistics executive who traveled frequently, she replied, her tone not challenging, merely factual. It said your mother was lonely. The directness was a shock to his system, disarming. He was used to lies, to layered deceptions. This was a clean, sharp blade of truth. He turned, leaning against the counter, facing her. And is she lonely? She misses her son. Christina held his gaze. She has pictures. A much younger you. You looked lighter. A ghost of a memory. A boy with a football. A mother's laugh from a sun-drenched garden. Flickered and died. That boy is gone. She doesn't believe that. Christina took a sip of her tea. I don't think I do either. A man who hires the best care for his mother, who checks the cameras every night. That man isn't gone. He's just buried. Dyun felt stripped bare. 5 minutes in her presence, and she had dismantled his armor with simple observation. Anger, a hot and familiar defense, rose. You are paid to care for her physical needs, not to psychoanalyze my family. You're right, she said, standing. She was taller than he expected. My mistake. Good night, Mr. Lee. She gathered her book, her movements still graceful, unruffled. But as she passed him, she paused. For what it's worth, the man who is gone. What did he want to be? Before he got so heavy, the question, asked so softly in the dim light, shattered something inside him. It was a question no one had dared ask in 15 years. Not his lieutenants, not his rivals, not the parade of women who saw only power and danger. The words left him before he could cage them. A teacher. He heard himself say it, the confession hanging in the air like smoke. History. Christina stopped. She didn't look at him with pity or surprise. She simply nodded, as if he'd confirmed something she already knew. That's a good thing to have been, she whispered, and a good thing to remember. Then she was gone, leaving him alone in the kitchen with the ghost of his former self and the lingering scent of her tea jasmine, and something indefinably warm. The next 3 months unfolded in a silent, profound shift. Dyun's visits to the main house became frequent, then routine. He told himself it was to monitor his mother's progress. Pina, indeed, was blooming under Christina's care. The pallor of chronic pain was receding, replaced by a softer light in her eyes. She laughed more, a sound Dyun had almost forgotten. But he knew, in the secret vault of his heart, that he was there for another reason. He'd find Christina in the garden, patiently explaining the herbs she was planting to his mother. He'd overhear her telling stories of Johannesburg, of dusty red roads and vast, star-crusted skies, her voice painting pictures more vivid than any television. She treated Pina not as a patient, but as a person, a woman with a history, with wisdom, with a stubborn streak that matched her own. Dyun watched, a captivated audience of one. One afternoon, he found her alone, repotting a stubborn azalea. She talks about you all the time, you know, Christina said without looking up, her hands deep in the soil. Your mother. How you used to follow her around the kitchen, stealing bits of dough. How you won a history prize in school. She's very proud. Dyun stood awkwardly, feeling like a giant in the delicate space. She remembers a different life. It's her life, and yours. She sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a smudge of earth. Why do you stay away from it? The world I'm in. It's not for gardens and tea. The admission was easier now with her. It has shadows. They cling. Christina looked up at him then, the sun catching the gold in her brown eyes. Everyone has shadows, Dyun. It was the first time she'd used his name. It felt like a key turning in a long-locked door. The question is whether you let them choke the light, or whether you plant something that grows in spite of them. He had no answer. He, who commanded rooms with a glance, was rendered speechless by a woman with dirt under her nails. Tai Hyen, his ever-watchful lieutenant, noticed the change. Sir, he said one evening in the study, his voice low with caution. The caregiver. You are spending much time there. The men talk. Let them talk, Dyun said, his voice leaving no room for discussion. But Tai's words were a splash of cold water. The shadows he spoke of had teeth. They were not just his. They encircled everyone he touched. That night, the hollow in his chest was no longer quiet. It whispered of danger. The crisis came on a Tuesday. Dyun was in a tense, silent negotiation with a rival outfit's representative when his personal phone vibrated. The line connected only to the house. He excused himself, a cold finger of dread tracing his spine. Christina's voice was calm, but he heard the steel beneath. It's your mother. She had a fall in the garden. She's conscious, but her wrist, I think it's broken. I've called the ambulance. The world narrowed to a tunnel. The rival's smug face, the unfinished deal, the billions on the table. It all dissolved into noise. I'm coming, he said, already moving. He broke every traffic law getting to the hospital. When he burst into the emergency room, his exterior was all controlled fury, a boss expecting answers. But inside he was a terrified little boy. He found them in a curtained bay. His mother, pale but composed, her wrist in a temporary cast. And Christina, standing protectively beside the gurney, one hand resting gently on Pina's shoulder. She was speaking in low, soothing Korean, explaining the procedures to come. When she saw Dyun, her gaze met his, and in it, he saw no blame, no panic. Only solid, unwavering competence, and shared concern. The doctor says it's a clean fracture, she said, translating the calm to him. She'll need surgery to pin it. Dyun approached, his usual authority useless here. He took his mother's good hand. Yama, I'm here. His mother's eyes, watery with pain and medication, focused on him. Dyun, don't scare the poor girl. It was my own foolishness, reaching for a rose. She patted his hand. Christina was a lioness, so strong. He looked over his mother's head at Christina. Thank you, he said, the words utterly inadequate. In that moment she wasn't an employee. She was the only anchor in a suddenly rocking world. He stayed. He canceled his meetings, ignoring the frantic calls from Tai Hyen. He haunted the hospital corridors, a dangerous and out-of-place figure. Christina seamlessly managed it all, coordinating with doctors, fetching blankets, translating medical jargon, and ensuring Pina never saw a flicker of her son's deep-seated fear. They moved around each other in the small room, a silent, efficient dance. During a moment when his mother slept, he brought her a cup of terrible hospital coffee. You should rest, he said. So should you. She accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing. A simple touch, yet it sent a current through him. She's going to be okay. The surgeon is excellent. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't there, he confessed, the words raw. You would have managed, but you don't have to manage alone. She held his gaze. That's the point of having people, Dyun. You carry the load together. For the first time in his adult life, the weight on his shoulders didn't feel entirely his to bear. A crack had become a chasm, and through it, a blinding, terrifying light was pouring in. He knew then, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that this woman had become the most critical vulnerability, and the only source of strength he had ever known. And in his world, such a thing was a target. The fear that followed that realization was colder than any shadow. The hospital air was a sterile blanket, smothering and cold. Dyun had grown accustomed to the sharp scent of antiseptic, the hushed, urgent tones of the night staff, the constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that lived in his bones. He sat in the chair next to his mother's bed, a sentinel in a dark suit, his posture rigid. Pina slept, her breath a faint, rhythmic whisper against the oxygen tube. The cast on her wrist was a stark white accusation. Christina moved through the room like a quiet revolution. She adjusted the drip flow with a nurse's precision, smoothed the sheets with a daughter's tenderness, and monitored the vital screen with a general's focus. She had not left, despite his terse offers to have her relieved. I'll stay, she'd said, simple and final. Her presence was the only warmth in the room. She brought him a fresh cup of coffee, this one from the cafeteria downstairs, marginally better than the sludge from the vending machine. You need to eat something, she said, her voice low. There's a juk place across the street. I can go. He took the cup, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. I'm not hungry. You're no good to her if you collapse. There was no nonsense in her tone, the same tone she used to gently bully Pina into taking her supplements. It sparked a faint, unexpected defiance in him. I said I'm not hungry. The words came out sharper than he intended, layered with the frustration of his own helplessness. Christina didn't flinch. She pulled another chair close and sat beside him, not looking at him but at Pina. When my sister was sick, she began, her gaze distant. Back in Johannesburg, I spent months in hospitals. The lights, the sounds, they become a kind of hell. You start to feel like you're made of the same plastic as the chairs. Cold and brittle. Dyun glanced at her profile. The tiredness was there, in the slight droop of her shoulders, but her resolve was unbroken. He'd had men break under less pressure. What was wrong with her? Kidney failure. Christina's throat worked as she swallowed. For a long time it was just waiting. Waiting for a donor, waiting for test results, waiting for a miracle. I thought if I just watched her closely enough, if I was perfect enough, I could keep her alive by willpower alone. She gave a soft, self-deprecating sigh. I forgot to eat for 2 days once. Fainted right in the hallway. She was so angry with me when she found out. A shared silence settled between them, filled with the beeps and whispers of the hospital. The hollow in Dyun's chest wasn't just his own anymore. It echoed with her story. Did she get her miracle? She got a kidney. A cousin was a match. A small, genuine smile touched Christina's lips. She's loud and healthy and drives me crazy from 12,000 kilometers away. So, you see, the waiting isn't passive. It's an act of faith. But faith needs fuel. Go eat the juk, Dyun. I will watch her with the same eyes. He went. Not because he was hungry, but because her command, woven with shared vulnerability, was one he found he couldn't disobey. The simple rice porridge tasted like ashes, but he ate it all, feeling the warmth seep into his frozen core. When he returned, he brought a container for her. She accepted it, their hands meeting briefly on the plastic lid. "Thank you," she said, and her eyes held something deeper than gratitude. Pina's recovery at home was slow. The house adapted. Dyun's study became a temporary ground-floor bedroom to avoid stairs. The stark modernity of the living area was softened with throws and pillows. And Christina was everywhere, the steady, capable center of their suddenly small universe. Dyun began to work from home. At first, it was a practical decision. Then, it became a preference. The tense, encrypted calls from his office were conducted from behind his closed study door, a world of threats and strategies that felt increasingly abstract. He'd emerge, the mask of the boss slipping from his face like a physical weight, and be drawn to the living room by the sound of laughter or the soft murmur of conversation. One evening, he found Christina reading to his mother from a Korean poetry book. He lingered in the doorway, unseen. Christina's pronunciation was careful, occasionally stumbling, but the rhythm and emotion she gave the words were perfect. Pina's eyes were closed, a serene smile on her face. When Christina finished the poem, there was a quiet moment. "She sees you, you know," Pina said, her voice thin but clear. Christina turned a page softly. "Who, Halmione?" "My son. She sees the man, not the weight he carries." Pina opened her eyes, turning her head with effort to look at Christina. "You have brought the sun into this old house. Into him." Christina's cheeks flushed. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Pina said with gentle firmness. "This is not a job. This is a heart. You should tell him." Dyun's breath caught. He should have made a noise, announced himself. But he was paralyzed, a thief in his own hallway, stealing a truth he was terrified to hear. Christina looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "It's not that simple. His world. It's not my world. I'm just passing through. The strongest trees grow from seeds carried on the wind from far away," Pina murmured, drifting back towards sleep. "Don't be afraid of the soil here, child. It is ready to bloom." Dyun retreated, his heart hammering against his ribs. She seized the man. The words were a lifeline and a sentence. To be seen was all he had secretly craved. But to be seen by her made the danger she was in exponentially worse. He went to his study, poured a drink he didn't taste, and stared at the city lights. Tai Hyen's warnings echoed in his mind, now laced with a new, personal dread. 3 weeks later, the fragile peace shattered again. It was past midnight. Dyun, unable to sleep, was reviewing security protocols when a sound pierced the silence. A stifled, desperate sob came from the garden. He found her on the stone bench beneath the old plum tree, the one she had been nursing back to health. She was curled in on herself, shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. The sight was a physical blow. In all the crisis, he had never seen her break. She was the unshakable one. Christina. He was beside her in an instant, his hand hovering over her back, unsure. "What is it? Is it my mother?" She shook her head, a ragged gasp escaping her. She tried to speak, but words failed her. She simply held out her phone, the screen glowing in the dark. It was a news alert, written in English. His Korean mind translated it in fragments. Johannesburg, clinic fire, suspected electrical fault. No survivors recovered from the overnight wing. It was the clinic where her sister had received her follow-up care, where she was staying for a routine observation. The world dropped out from under him. He understood then, with horrifying clarity, the true depth of her sacrifice. She had left her recovered, vibrant sister to care for a stranger's mother on another continent. And now, in the cruelest twist, that sister was gone. The anchor of her life vanished in smoke. Oh God, Christina. His hand fell on her shoulder. It was the only anchor he could offer. She turned into him then, not as an employer but as a crumbling human being. Her face pressed against his chest, her fists clutching the fabric of his shirt, and she wept. It was a silent, shattering storm, all the more devastating for its lack of sound. He held her, his arms tightening around her, his chin resting on the crown of her head. He had no words. There were no words. He just held on, letting the tremors rack through her, absorbing the shock of her grief into his own body. He didn't know how long they stayed like that, in the dark, under the indifferent stars. When her sobs finally subsided into shaky, hiccuping breaths, she didn't pull away. He felt her breath warm against his neck. "I have to go back," she whispered, the words raw. "I know," he said, his voice thick. "I'll arrange everything, the fastest flight, whatever you need." She looked up then, her eyes ravaged, glowing with unshed tears in the moonlight. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Stop." The word was gentle but firm. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, a gesture so intimate it surprised them both. "Don't you ever apologize for this. Not to me." In that moment, the last wall between them dissolved. The caregiver and the boss were gone. There was only a man and a woman, bound by a shared, profound ache. He knew, with a certainty that eclipsed all fear, that he would burn the world to the ground to spare her another second of this pain. The realization should have terrified him. It only felt like the first true thing he'd known in years. He stayed with her until dawn began to bleed into the sky, a pale, bruised color. He made her tea, forced a piece of toast into her, and personally drove her to the airport, his most trusted man following in a separate car for security she was too numb to consider. At the departure gate, she looked so lost, a piece of parchment about to be blown into a storm. "Christina." She turned to him, her eyes hollow. He took her hand, ignoring the people streaming past. "When you're ready, however long it takes, this is your home too. Come back to us." She didn't promise. She just squeezed his hand, a fleeting, desperate pressure, then turned and walked into the terminal, disappearing into the crowd. Dyun stood rooted to the spot, the hollow in his chest now a yawning, screaming chasm. The house, when he returned, was not just silent. It was dead. A week passed in a gray haze. His mother, sensing the cataclysm, asked quiet questions he couldn't answer. Tai Hyen handled the business, reporting with a grim efficiency that told Dyun his own distraction was noted. He paced the empty garden, her garden, every night. The plum tree looked as bereft as he felt. Then, on the 8th day, his phone rang. An unknown South African number. His heart stopped. He answered a gruff, "Yes." A beat of silence. Then a voice, cracked and exhausted, but hers. "Dyun." The sound of his name on her lips nearly brought him to his knees. "Christina, are you?" It was a mistake. The words tumbled out, breathless. A horrific mistake. Clerical error. The news report, it listed the wrong wing. "My sister. She was discharged the day before. She's safe. She's home." A sob of sheer, undiluted relief choked him. He leaned heavily against the garden wall. "Thank God. I'm coming back," she said, and he could hear the first fragile thread of hope in her voice. "If the offer, if it still stands." "It stands," he said, the words a vow. "It will always stand. Come home." When she walked through the door 2 days later, she was thinner, shadows like bruises under her eyes, but she was whole. Pina wept, holding her good arm out. Dyun stood back, giving them space, his own emotions a turbulent sea he dared not set loose. It was later, after Pina had retired, that she found him in the garden. The night was clear, the city a distant constellation. "You called it home," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "It is." He looked at her, finally allowing everything he felt to show in his eyes. The fear, the relief, the desperate, consuming need. "You are my home, Christina. I think you have been since the first night I heard you singing in my kitchen." She didn't smile. She simply reached up, her palm cool against his cheek. "I saw the man in the shadows that night," she whispered, "and I wanted to bring him into the light." He captured her hand, turning his face to kiss her palm. The touch was electric, a circuit finally completed. "You did," he breathed against her skin. Then he lowered his head, and his lips found hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was a confession, a surrender, a claiming. It was years of loneliness dissolving in a shared breath. It was the promise of a new world, fragile and terrifying and brilliant, born in the ashes of their old ones. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, the world had irrevocably changed. "I love you," he said, the word strange and perfect on his tongue. Her answer was another kiss, deep and sure. The garden, once a place of solitude, now held the seed of their future. And Dyun knew, with a predator's instinct, that he would now have to fight for this fragile, precious thing with every dark skill he possessed. The shadows were watching, and they always hungered for the light. The scent of jasmine and damp earth still clung to Dyun's skin, a sensory tattoo from the garden, from her. The world had crystallized around that kiss, every color sharper, every sound more distinct. The hollow in his chest was gone, filled with a terrifying, exhilarating warmth. For 3 days, he moved through his life in a daze, the fortress of his existence now feeling like a place of possibility rather than a prison. He watched Christina with a new, raw wonder. The way she laughed with his mother over a missorted pile of laundry, the focused frown as she planned the week's meals, the calm certainty in her hands as she changed the dressing on Pina's wrist. She was no longer just the caregiver. She was the center of gravity in his universe. And the fear that accompanied that realization was a live wire, buzzing just beneath his skin. Tai-Hyen felt the shift like a barometric drop. "Sir," he said, standing rigid in the study. The account books were open, detailing a lucrative but problematic shipping contract with a minor family, the Jang Consortium. "The Jangs are getting ambitious. They're asking for a larger percentage of the port fees. They cite increased operational difficulties." Dyun stared at the numbers, but they were just ink. All he could see was Christina's smile from that morning, a private, sunlit thing meant only for him. "Give it to them," he said, his voice distant.
Tai-Hyen blinked.
"Sir, it's a significant concession. They'll see it as weakness. Let them see it as a distraction," Dyun said, finally looking up. His eyes held a strange light. "Or disinterest. I don't care. By quiet, Tai. I want quiet on all fronts." His lieutenant's jaw tightened. "This quiet, is it for the woman?" The air in the room chilled instantly. Dyun's gaze, so recently soft, turned to flint. "Her name," he said, each word a shard of ice, "is Christina, and what she is to me is not a topic for discussion. Your job is to ensure the machinery runs smoothly so I don't have to focus on it. Can you do that? Or do I find someone who can?" It was the first time Dyun had ever threatened him, even indirectly. Tai-Hyen paled, bowing his head. "Understood, sir. I will secure the quiet." But quiet, in Dyun's world, was a currency that was always in short supply. While he was dreaming of a future, his past was coiling to strike. In a neon-soaked lounge across the city, Lee Jin-ho, Dyun's trusted advisor on financial flows, nursed a glass of expensive scotch. Across from him, slouched in a booth with predatory ease, was Jang Deok-soo, the head of the ambitious consortium. "The word is," Jang said, his voice a gravelly smirk, "our formidable Mr. Lee has a new hobby, a gardener." Jin-ho swirled his liquor, not meeting the man's eyes. "He's been preoccupied with his mother's health. A mother he never visited, cared for by a foreigner he now can't seem to leave?" Jang laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That's not preoccupation, Jin-ho. That's an obsession. That's a flaw in the armor." He leaned forward. My sources say he's conceding points, smoothing edges. He's soft. A soft king is a dead king. He's not soft, Jinho countered. But his voice lacked conviction. He had seen the change too. The distracted looks, the shortened meetings, the unprecedented delegation of decisions. Dyun was building a sanctuary, brick by brick, and neglecting his walls. He's vulnerable, Zhang insisted. And vulnerability is an opportunity. For you as well. You've been his number cruncher for a decade. Where's your crown? He keeps you in a basement, counting his gold while he plays house. The poison was expertly delivered. Jinho's own quiet resentments, his hunger for respect rather than just a salary, rose to the surface. What are you suggesting? Zhang's smile was all teeth. I'm suggesting that a change in management could be beneficial. For everyone, a little restructuring. And this gardener of his is the key. She's the leverage that turns a difficult fight into a simple transaction. Jinho felt a cold sweat prickle his neck. This was treason. This was a death sentence if Dyun found out. But Zhang's words painted a seductive picture. A seat at the head of the table, recognition, power that was his own, not borrowed. He's protective. He'll burn the city down if you touch her. Exactly, Zhang whispered, his eyes gleaming. And while he's burning the city down for her, who is minding the empire? You are. We take her, we make our demands, and when he's frantic and exposed, we don't just take a port fee. We take it all. And you, my friend, will be the new face of a grateful, consolidated enterprise. The temptation was a gorge, dark and deep. Jinho looked into it, and his ambition whispered back. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The plan was set in motion with clinical precision. Jinho provided the schedules, the routines, the vulnerabilities. He confirmed that Dyun would be across the city in a mandatory, high-stakes arbitration meeting with a different faction. A meeting Jinho had helped orchestrate to pull the king from his castle. Christina's day was ordinary. A morning spent with Pina, who was finally regaining strength. A trip to the local market for fresh vegetables for a new soup recipe. She moved with a new lightness, a song still in her heart from the garden. Dyun had kissed her goodbye that morning, a brief, hard press of his lips to her temple that held a universe of unspoken promise. Stay with Tai today, he'd murmured. I'll be back by dinner. She'd nodded, savoring the concern. She didn't see the shadow that crossed Tai Hyen's face as Dyun gave the order. The black sedan with tinted windows was waiting 2 blocks from the market. In a blind spot between security cameras Jinho had conveniently listed as under maintenance. As Christina walked back, her reusable bag heavy with produce, a white van suddenly reversed, blocking her path. The side door slid open. Before she could even process the threat, 2 men in nondescript clothing moved with terrifying speed. A hand clamped over her mouth, smelling of chemical leather. Another arm hooked around her waist, lifting her clean off her feet. Her bag of groceries hit the pavement, tomatoes bursting like blood on the concrete. A stifled scream died in her throat. She fought, a wild, panicked thrashing, her elbow connecting with something hard. A grunt of pain, then a sharp, clinical prick on the side of her neck. The world dissolved into a thick, syrupy darkness. Dyun was in the arbitration, his expression a mask of cold impatience. He was mentally already home, already with her. His phone, set to silent, vibrated in his pocket. Once, twice. He ignored it. On the third, persistent buzz, he glanced down discreetly. It was Tai Hyen. A curl of unease, sharp and immediate, tightened in his gut. Tai would not interrupt for anything less than a catastrophe. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the droning legal argument. He stood and walked to the windowed anteroom, answering the call. "This better be critical." Tai Hyen's voice was stripped of all its usual calm, vibrating with barely contained panic. "Sir, she's gone." 2 words. 2 words that turned Dyun's blood to ice. "Explain." "The market run. There was a van. Witnesses saw a struggle, but it was over in seconds. They took her. We found her bag. And This. Ty's voice cracked. They left a phone. At the scene. It's ringing. Dyun's vision tunneled. The glittering cityscape outside the window became a meaningless blur. A primal, silent roar filled his skull. The ice in his veins ignited into a cold, pure fire. Where are you? At the site. The police are being held back. What are your orders? Orders. The word belonged to another life. The man who gave orders was gone. In his place was something raw and elemental. Touch nothing. Isolate the area. I am coming. And Ty, he added, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. If this is an inside job, the person responsible will beg for death long before I am finished with them. He ended the call. He turned and walked back into the arbitration room. Every eye turned to him. The opposing boss, a smug man named Park, started to say, "Now, Mr. Lee, if we can return to the—" Dyun didn't speak. He walked to the head of the table to where Park sat. He placed both hands on the polished wood and leaned forward, his face inches from Park's. The room froze. "Listen to me very carefully," Dyun said, his voice a low, deadly hum. "Something of mine has been taken. I am leaving now. If I discover you or any of your people had even a whisper of knowledge about this, I will not take your territory. I will salt the earth where your home stands and erase the memory of your bloodline from this city. Do you understand?" Park, his face white, could only nod. Dyun straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. It was the look of a king who had become a natural disaster. "The arbitration is over. My terms are accepted. Any objection is a declaration of war." He walked out, leaving a silence heavier than any explosion. The drive to the market was a blur of snarled traffic and screaming sirens from his escort cars. He was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped, his coat flapping behind him like a dark wing. The scene was a curated nightmare. His men formed a tight, grim perimeter. In the center of the cordon, on the dirty pavement, lay Christina's colorful reusable bag, its contents spilled. The smashed tomatoes looked obscene, and beside it a cheap, disposable mobile phone. It rang. The shrill, generic tone was the loudest sound in the world. Dyun walked toward it, every step measured. He knelt, a knight in a ruined world, and picked it up. He pressed answer and put it to his ear. He said nothing. A digitally altered voice filled his ear. "Mr. Lee, you have something we want. We have something you want. A simple transaction. If you harm one hair on her head," Dyun said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "there is no place on this earth you will hide from me." The voice laughed. "The port. The entire Western Dock operation. You will sign it over, free and clear, to the Jang Consortium. You will announce your retirement. When we are satisfied, you will get your flower back. Unwilting, you have 6 hours to prepare the documents." The line went dead. Dyun lowered the phone. He looked at the smashed tomatoes, at the evidence of her ordinary, beautiful life interrupted. The cold fire in his chest solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. He turned to Tai Hyen, whose face was etched with guilt and fear. "The Jangs," Dyun stated. "It appears so, sir. The phone's origin, the method, it fits their crude style." Dyun's mind, once clouded with love, was now a crystal-clear engine of vengeance. This wasn't just the Jangs. Their blunt instruments. They had inside knowledge. Timing. Routes. His eyes locked onto Ty's. "Find the leak. Use whatever means. I want a name in 1 hour." He then looked at the devastation around him, at the terrified faces of his men. He spoke, and his voice carried to all of them. "They think they have my weakness. They are wrong." He lifted his gaze, and it was like watching a dormant volcano awaken. "They have just shown me my only strength. We are not negotiating. We are not trading. We are going to take her back. And then we are going to burn the Jang Consortium to the ground. Every warehouse, every account, every memory. Is that understood?" A low, fierce growl of assent came from his men. The fear was gone, replaced by a focused fury. Dyun's love had not made him soft. It had given his violence a purpose, and that made him more dangerous than he had ever been. The rescue mission was no longer a tactical operation. It was a crusade. The disposable phone felt like a live grenade in Dyun's hand. The digital hum of the ended call echoed in the silent, cordoned-off street. He stared at the smashed tomatoes, the vibrant red seeping into the cracks in the pavement, and in that mundane wreckage, he saw the entire future they had barely begun to imagine, obliterated. He turned. The mask of the man was gone. What remained was a pure, predatory instrument. His eyes, when they found Tai Hyen, were the flat, black stones from the bottom of a deep river. 1 hour, he repeated, his voice devoid of all humanity. Not a second more. The machinery of his empire, usually oiled with money and threat, now shrieked into motion under the heat of his wrath. His command center became the back of his armored sedan, phones pressed to ears, tablets glowing with maps and financial records. Dyun sat amidst it, perfectly still, a dark sun generating a storm. The first breakthrough came not from digital trails, but from fear. One of the perimeter guards from the house, a young man named Minho, was brought forward by 2 large enforcers. He was shaking violently. "Sir, I saw nothing, I swear. Your shift log says you were at the eastern gate from noon until 4. Dyun interrupted, his voice quiet. He didn't look at the boy. He was studying a satellite image of the warehouse district. The security hard drive for that camera shows a 12-minute gap at 2:07 p.m. A systems glitch, recorded in the log by Lee Jinho's authorization code.
Minho Palette.
Mr. Jinho said it was a routine diagnostic. He told me to take my break early, that he'd watch the feed. Dyun's gaze finally lifted. It was like being pinned by the gaze of a shark. And did he? I don't know, sir. I left for 15 minutes. When I came back, he was gone. Jinho. Dyun breathed the name. It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence. The betrayal was a physical toxin in his blood. His most trusted financial mind, the man who knew the flows of all his fortunes, had turned that knowledge into a weapon. Tai Hyen's phone buzzed. He listened, his face grim. They've triangulated the signal from the disposable. It's a dead zone in the old textile mill complex by the river. Abandoned. Jangs have used it before for storage. Is he there? Dyun asked. Jinho? Our team just hit his apartment. Empty. Safe is open, cleaned out. He's in the wind, or with them. Dyun closed his eyes. When he opened them, all hesitation was gone. Mobilize Team 1 and 2. Full tactical. Silent approach. I want the perimeter of that mill sealed before a sparrow can fly out. No one gets in or out who isn't us. Sir, the demand, the 6 hours. If we assault, they could kill her. Dyun leaned forward, and the air in the car grew thin. They took her because they believe I am a rational actor, that I will weigh assets, negotiate, trade. They believe my love for her is a weakness that makes me predictable. A muscle ticked in his jaw. They are about to learn how wrong they are. They have not seen my love. They have only seen my business. My love is not rational. It is annihilation. We go now. The convoy of black vehicles moved like a funeral procession toward the river. Inside the lead car, Dyun loaded a handgun with methodical, chilling calm. The metallic clicks were the only sound. When we have her, Tai Hyen ventured, his voice tight. What are your orders for the Jangs? Dyun slid the magazine home with a final, definitive snap. There are no orders. There is a cleanup. The old mill was a skeleton of rust and broken windows, a jagged silhouette against the bruised purple twilight. Christina swam back to consciousness in stages. First came the pain. A deep throbbing in her skull where the needle had gone in, a raw ache in her arms, wrenched behind her. Then the smell. Damp concrete, stale oil, and a sweet, rotten undertone of forgotten grain. She was on a cold concrete floor, her back against a metal support pillar. Rough plastic zip ties cut into her wrists. Fear came last, a cold flood that washed away the grogginess. She remembered the van, the hand, the prick. Dyun. The thought of him was a lance of pure panic. not for herself, but for what this would do to him, what it would make him do. A single, hanging bulb cast a pallid pool of light. In the shadows beyond, she could make out shapes, crates, machinery shrouded in tarps, and men. 2 of them lounged by a makeshift heater, sharing a cigarette. A third, older, with a face like a hatchet and expensive shoes, stood looking at a laptop on a folding table.
Kang Deoksu.
He noticed her stirring and walked over, his shoes echoing in the vast space. He crouched, bringing the smell of expensive cologne and stale smoke with him. Ah, the sleeping beauty awakes. Welcome to the real world, little bird. Christina said nothing. She locked her gaze on a crack in the floor, focusing on her breathing, on containing the terror. Your boyfriend is quite the romantic, Jang mused, lighting his own cigarette. He didn't even try to negotiate, just made threats. Very dramatic. He blew smoke out slowly. He'll negotiate. When he hears you scream, he'll negotiate very quickly. She lifted her head then, meeting his eyes. The fear was there, a living thing in her chest, but beneath it, a fierce, protective rage began to burn. You don't know him at all. Jang's smile vanished. I know he's a businessman, and I have his most prized business asset. He reached out and grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. She cried out, the sound tearing from her throat before she could stop it. See? That's the sound. We'll send him a recording. A little sample. Tears of pain and fury sprang to her eyes. He'll kill you for this. He'll try, Jang said, releasing her with a shove. But by then I'll own the docks. I'll have his money, his influence. And you? You'll be a lesson in what happens when a wolf tries to live like a lapdog. He stood, brushing off his trousers. Make her more comfortable. We want her vocal cords in good working order for the next call. One of the guards ambled over with a bottle of water. He untied her wrists for a moment, just long enough for her to take a drink. As she gulped the tepid water, her eyes darted around. One exit, a large rolling door, chained and padlocked. A metal staircase leading to a rusted catwalk. 3 men, maybe 4 in the shadows. And Jang. The guard retied her hands, tighter this time. As he leaned close, she saw the butt of a pistol tucked into his waistband. A reckless, desperate plan, born of pure love for the man she knew was coming, began to form in her mind. She had to cause a distraction. She had to give Dyun an opening, even if it got her killed. Dying was better than being the weapon that destroyed him. Outside, the night was silent. Dyun's men were ghosts, flitting through the surrounding ruins, taking up positions. Thermal scans showed 4, possibly 5 heat signatures inside the main mill floor. One was stationary, seated Christina. Dyun observed the feed on a tablet, his heart a cold, hard drum. He was clad in black tactical gear, a stark transformation from the suited king. He pointed to a service door on the satellite image. This is rusted, likely barred from inside. Team 2 creates a diversion at the main rolling door in 3 minutes. A loud one. Team 1 breaches here with me. Priority is the asset. All other targets are secondary until she is secure. Then, he said, looking at each man in turn, you have free fire.
No survivors.
The countdown began. Dyun moved to the service door, a shaped charge already being placed by a specialist. He checked his weapon one last time. In his mind, he wasn't storming a stronghold. He was walking into a room where the only thing that mattered was in the center. Everything else was just noise to be silenced. Inside, Christina heard a low thump from the far side of the building, followed by the sound of shouting Jang men running toward the noise. Now, she took a deep breath, gathered every ounce of strength, and screamed. Not a scream of fear, but a raw, piercing shriek of defiance. Dyun. The catwalk. There on the... A backhand from the guard who stayed behind snapped her head to the side, cutting her off. Blood filled her mouth. But it was enough. At the service door, Dyun heard it. Her voice, laced with pain, giving him a tactical gift. Breach, he snarled. The charge detonated with a concussive crump, blowing the door inward in a cloud of splinters and dust. Dyun was the first through the smoke, his weapon up. The scene imprinted itself in an instant. Christina, bleeding on the floor, a guard standing over her, turning in shock. Jang Deok-soo by the table, reaching for a weapon. Dyun didn't hesitate. 2 suppressed shots, precise and clinical. The guard by Christina dropped. He shifted his aim. Jang had his pistol halfway up. Dyun fired again. The round took Jang in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry. "Clear the catwalk!" Dyun yelled, even as he closed the distance to Christina in 3 long strides. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands moving to her face, her bonds, his touch transforming from lethal precision to desperate gentleness. "Christina, look at me. Are you hurt? Are you shot?" Her eyes, wide with shock and adrenaline, focused on him. She shook her head, spitting blood.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
The sound of rapid, suppressed gunfire echoed from the metal catwalk above, then silence. Tai Hyen's voice crackled in his earpiece. Catwalk clear. 1 hostile eliminated. The main floor. Dyun's gaze never left Christina's face as he spoke. Main floor contained. Secure the perimeter. Find Jinho. He used a knife to slice through the plastic ties on her wrists, his hands trembling now that the action was over. He saw the livid mark on her cheek, the blood at her lip. A rage so profound it was calm settled over him. He gently wiped the blood with his thumb.
I'm sorry.
"I'm so sorry." She grasped his hand, holding it tightly. "You came. I will always come." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight, pulling her into the shelter of his body. He looked over her head to where Jang Deok-soo was writhing on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Dyun's eyes were the eyes of a man gazing into an abyss he had long avoided. The rescue was over. The retribution was about to begin. The silence after the gunfire was thicker than the dust motes dancing in the hanging bulb's light. Dyun held Christina against him, his body a shield between her and the rest of the ruined mill. Her trembling was fine and constant, a vibration against his chest where his heart hammered a violent, irregular rhythm. The tactical part of his brain was already assessing. Perimeter secure, target Jang neutralized, asset protected. But the man, the one who had just seen the love of his life bleeding on a concrete floor, was operating on a raw, savage frequency. "Get her to the car," he instructed Tai Hyen, his voice a gravelly command. "The armored one. Have Dr. Kwan meet us at the safe house. Now." His arms reluctantly loosened around Christina. She clung to his tactical vest. "Dyun, I'm right behind you," he murmured into her hair, his lips brushing her temple. It was a lie and they both knew it. His eyes, when she pulled back to search them, were already scanning the room, landing on the groaning form of Jang Deok-soo. The promise in that look was more terrifying than any gunshot. "Go with Tai, please." She went, leaning on the lieutenant, casting one last, desperate look over her shoulder. Dyun watched until the service door swallowed them, until the sound of their retreating footsteps faded. Then, the last vestige of humanity bled from his expression. He walked toward Jang. Each step echoed in the cavernous space. The 2 other guards lay where they had fallen. The man from the catwalk was being dragged down the metal stairs by Dyun's operatives, a dark trail left behind. Dyun stopped, towing Jang's dropped pistol away before crouching down. He didn't speak. He simply watched the man struggle to breathe through the pain of his shattered shoulder. "Jinho," Dyun finally said, the name flat. Jang spat blood, a grimace of pain and defiance. "Smart boy. Smarter than you." He saw the future, a future where he wasn't your servant. Where is he? Gone. With a down payment. He'll be in a new country with a new name by dawn. Counting your money. Jang managed a wet, choking laugh. "You lost, Lee. You got your girl back. But you lost. The word is out. You're compromised. You're a joke. A king who kneels for a maid." Dyun absorbed the words. He didn't react with anger. He nodded slowly, as if considering a complex business proposition. Then, with a movement too fast to follow, he drew a slender, wicked-looking combat knife from his vest. He placed the tip against Jang's good shoulder, right above the collarbone. "I am not a king," Dyun said. His voice so quiet Jang had to stop breathing to hear it. "Kings rule by divine right. I rule because I am the most dangerous thing in any room I enter." He pressed down. The tip pierced fabric, then skin. Jang stiffened, a muffled scream trapped behind his clenched teeth. "You thought my love for her was a lever. You thought you could move me with it." He leaned closer, his face inches from Jang's. "You were correct. You just didn't understand the direction. You didn't move me to the negotiating table. You moved me here, to a dark place with you." He stood up abruptly, wiping the knife's tip on his thigh. "Bring him, and find Jinho. I want his trail before the hour is out. Empty every account he's ever touched. Freeze every asset. Contact our friends in immigration, in customs, in Interpol. He does not get to disappear." As his men moved to obey, Dyun's phone vibrated. It was the safe house. Dr. Kwan's calm, professional voice reported. Mild concussion, contusions, ligature marks on the wrists, but no serious or permanent damage. She was sedated and resting. The information was a lifeline, pulling him back from a very dark edge. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the first he felt he'd taken since he saw the grocery bag on the pavement. The cold fire in his veins banked, just slightly. He had her. She was safe. But as he drove through the neon-washed city toward the nondescript safe-house apartment, the reality of Jinho's betrayal festered. It was the ultimate violation. This wasn't a rival's attack. It was the rot within. It made every shadow suspect, every loyalty questionable. The sanctuary he was trying to build with Christina felt like a sandcastle with the tide coming in. He entered the apartment to find it dimly lit, silent. Dr. Kwan gave a brief, silent nod from the kitchen before slipping out. Tai Hyen stood guard in the living room. "She's in the main bedroom," he murmured. Dyun stood outside the door for a long minute, suddenly afraid. He was coated in the grit and violence of the mill. He could still smell the concrete dust, the cordite, the copper tang of blood, Jang's blood on his knife. He shed his tactical vest, his weapon, leaving them in a pile on the hallway floor like the skin of a monster. He washed his hands and face in the guest bathroom, scrubbing until his skin was raw, but he couldn't wash the night out of his eyes. He pushed the door open softly. She was asleep in the large bed, dwarfed by it, her face pale against the pillow. Even in the dim light from the hallway, he could see the darkening bruise on her cheek, the slight puffiness of her lip. A protective rage, clean and sharp, sliced through him. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, not wanting to wake her, just needing to be near, to confirm with his own eyes that she was whole. Her eyes fluttered open. She hadn't been fully asleep. "Dyun." He reached out, his hand hovering, then gently cupping her uninjured cheek. "I'm here. You killed them." It wasn't a question. It was the acknowledgement of a terrible truth. He admitted, no point in lies now. Jang is alive. For now. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping to track through the dust on her temple. "Because of me."
No.
The word was fierce, absolute. He lay down beside her, on top of the covers, gathering her carefully into his arms. She turned into him, her face buried in his chest, and he felt the dam break. Silent, body-racking sobs shook her. He held her through it, stroking her hair, whispering meaningless, soothing sounds. His own tears came then, hot and silent, of relief, of fury, of a grief for the last shred of his old life's illusion of control. When the storm passed, she lay spent against him. "Jinho," she whispered. "He's gone. But he won't get far. He was your friend." "He was a ledger," Dyun corrected, his voice hardening. "And he miscalculated." They lay in silence for a long time. The city's pulse was a faint hum through the double-paned glass. "What happens now?" she finally asked, the question hanging in the dark. Dyun stared at the ceiling. The answer, which had been forming in the desperate hours since her abduction, now crystallized with perfect, brutal clarity. Now, he said, I end it. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled dissolution. From the safe house, Dyun conducted the systematic dismantling of his own empire. He met with the heads of the remaining major families, not from a position of weakness, but from the terrifying, unassailable peak of a man with nothing left to lose. He presented the evidence of Jang's treachery and Jinho's betrayal. He didn't ask for peace, he dictated it. In return for my non-intervention in your absorption of the Jang territories, he told the gathered, wary old men in a neutral conference room, you will acknowledge and respect a permanent border. My operations will cease. My shipping lanes, my protection rackets, my gambling halls, they will be liquidated or transferred to a neutral holding company managed by a board you approve. I am retiring. The silence was stunned. Retirements in their world were usually permanent in a very final sense. What guarantees do we have? One of the elders asked. Dyun smiled. A cold, thin thing. You have my word. And you have the knowledge that if any of you or any of your successors ever looks in the direction of my family again, I will not come for your business. I will come for your bloodline. I will erase your names. This is not a negotiation. It is my final decree. It was the deal of the century for them, and they knew it. They gained territory and eliminated their most formidable competitor, all for the price of leaving one man and his domestic life alone. They agreed with solemn, hurried nods. The final piece was internal. He assembled his core crew in the warehouse that had once served as his primary logistics hub. Tai Hyen stood at his right hand. Dyun looked at the faces of the men who had fought for him, bled for him. The organization, as you know it, is over, he stated, no preamble. The Lee Syndicate is dissolving. Each of you will receive a severance package, generous enough to start a legitimate business, buy a home, disappear. Or you can take your skills and allegiance to one of the other families. I will not stop you. A murmur ran through the crowd. What about you, boss? Someone called out. Dyun's gaze found Tai Hyen. I am walking away. Tai Hyen will oversee the liquidation process. He has my full authority. He paused, letting the seismic shift settle. I have given you my life for 15 years. Now I am taking it back. For her. For me. Any questions? There were none. Only a deep, bewildered silence. He had just voluntarily surrendered a kingdom. To them, it was madness. To him, it was the only purchase price for the future he wanted. 2 days later, he brought Christina home. Not to the fortress, but to a new, modern penthouse apartment he had purchased under a blind trust a year ago. An escape hatch he'd never dreamed he'd use. It was bright, airy, with a terrace garden overlooking a different part of the city. Tina was already there, installed in the sunniest bedroom, confused but trusting. Christina stood in the living room, wrapped in a soft sweater, looking out at the view. It's so open. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. No more shadows, he promised, his voice rough with emotion. No more fortresses. Just us. She leaned back into him. And what will you do? The great Dyun Lee, retired at 35. He turned her gently to face him. In the clear afternoon light, he looked younger. The relentless tension in his face finally eased. I was thinking, he said, a tentative, almost boyish smile touching his lips for the first time since the mill. I never got to be that history teacher, but I know a bit about logistics. And you can make a meal that tastes like home, no matter where home is. He took her hands. What if we built a place, a restaurant, one that tells our story? Your bobotai next to my kimchi jjigae. A place where the only thing we protect is the flavor, and the only thing we guard is our family's table. The idea, so simple, so normal, was the most revolutionary thing he had ever proposed. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of light. A fusion restaurant? A fusion life, he corrected, kissing her forehead. Starting now. And in that sunlit room, with his mother humming an old tune in the other room and the woman he loved in his arms, Dyun Lee began the delicate, terrifying, beautiful work of building something he had never truly had, a future. The penthouse was not just a change of address. It was a shedding of skin. The first few weeks were a study in quiet, mutual decompression. Dyun, who had spent half his life reading threats in the tilt of a head, now found himself interpreting the silent language of domesticity. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustle of Christina turning a page in a cookbook, the distant sound of his mother's television from her room. These were the new perimeter alarms, and they signified peace. He was a novice at this life. He overcooked rice, flooded a pot while attempting to help with dishes, and stared in genuine confusion at the instructions for assembling a modular bookshelf. Christina would watch him, a smile playing on her lips, before gently taking the tools from his hands. "Your skills lie in other areas," she teased, her voice light. The bruise on her cheek faded to a yellow shadow, then vanished, but the memory of its presence was a ghost in both their eyes, a shared scar that made the quiet moments feel both precious and hard-won. Their project, the restaurant, became the healthy outlet for his formidable, redirected energy. It was a logistical campaign he could understand. Location scouting became his new reconnaissance. He analyzed foot traffic, supply routes, and competitor menus with the same intensity he once used for smuggling lanes and rival territories. He just did it from a laptop at the kitchen table, often with Christina's feet tucked under his legs. They decided on a name one night, after hours of debating. Harmony was Christina's suggestion. "Not fusion," she explained, stirring a pot of developing bobo Thai sauce. "Fusion can be a clash. Harmony is a blend. Two distinct notes that make a richer chord." Dyun, who was sketching a rough floor plan, looked up. "Harmony," he repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign on his tongue, a concept his life had explicitly denied. He nodded. "It's perfect." The search ended in Insadong, in a narrow, two-story hammock that had once been a ceramics gallery. It had a worn, graceful beauty, with wooden beams and a small, walled courtyard in the back. "This is it," Christina said the moment they stepped into the overgrown courtyard. "This feels like a place stories could be told." Dyun saw the potential through her eyes. Not square footage, but atmosphere. A place where the past was respected, and a new future could be grown. He negotiated the purchase with a startling directness and fairness that left the estate agent bewildered. The renovation was his therapy. He traded his tailored suits for contractor jeans. His knuckles, once split on rivals' jaws, now bore scuffs from sanding down old floorboards. He worked alongside the carpenters and electricians, learning, sweating, building something with his own hands for the first time. Tai Hyen would visit, reporting on the smooth liquidation of assets, and would stare, speechless, at the sight of his former boss arguing passionately about the merits of under-cabinet lighting versus pendant lamps. One afternoon, Dyun was staining the new countertop for the pass-through kitchen. Christina was in the courtyard, planting herbs in terracotta pots. Sunlight dappled through the old persimmon tree. Pina sat on a bench, watching them both, a serene expression on her face. Christina looked up, catching Dyun's gaze through the open window. She was radiant, soil on her hands, her hair escaping its bun. He felt a surge of emotion so profound it stole his breath. This was the empire he wanted. Not one of fear and tribute, but one of growth and shared labor. Later that night, in their new bedroom with the city lights sprawled below them, he traced the line of her shoulder. "Marry me," he said. The words were not a grand, rehearsed proposal. They were a quiet, urgent necessity, pushed out on a tide of feeling. She turned in his arms, her eyes searching his in the semi-darkness. "Is that a question or a decree, Mr. Lee?" "It's a plea," he confessed, his voice raw. "The only thing I've ever asked for that I'm afraid I don't deserve. Make a life with me, officially. Let me be your husband. Let me give you my name, for whatever it's worth now." Tears glimmered in her eyes, but she was smiling. "It's worth everything," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." The wedding was small, held in the courtyard of Harmony before it opened. Pina beamed in her finest hanbok. Christina wore a simple, elegant dress the color of cream, and Dyun a traditional hanbok in deep navy. They wrote their own vows. Christina promised honesty, warmth, and to always bring him back to the light. Dyun's voice broke as he vowed protection, fidelity, and to spend his life becoming a man worthy of her heart. Tai Hyen stood as his best man, his usual stoicism softened by the profound change he was witnessing. As they toasted with soju, he leaned close to Dyun. "I never thought I'd see this day, boss." "Neither did I," Dyun replied, clinking his glass. "And it's just the beginning." Harmony opened to quiet acclaim. Food critics were intrigued by the daring menu. Malva pudding with a yuja curd, boerewors sliders with gochujang glaze, a kimchi and cornbread stuffing. But the soul of the place was its feeling. It was warm, unpretentious, and run by a couple whose palpable love for each other and their craft infused every detail. Dyun was the quiet, watchful presence in the dining room, remembering regulars' names and preferred teas. Christina was the vibrant heart of the kitchen, her laughter ringing through the pass-through. It was a success, but more importantly, it was a life. A legitimate, taxing, gloriously ordinary life. The past, however, was a patient hunter. It did not announce itself with a bang, but with a whisper. It started with a financial anomaly. A small, dormant holding company in the Caymans, one Dyun had personally ordered emptied and shuttered during the liquidation, showed a minute, automated transaction. A $50 fee, paid from a residual fund no one should have accessed. It was the kind of digital breadcrumb only someone with intimate insider knowledge would know how to leave. Tai Hyen brought it to him at the restaurant, after the last customer had left. Dyun was wiping down tables, his sleeves rolled up. He read the report, and the relaxed set of his shoulders tensed, the old, cold awareness seeping back into his bones. "Jinho," he said. "It has to be," Tai agreed, his voice low. "A signal. A hello. He's telling us he's still out there, and he remembers the combinations to the safe." A few days later, Christina, while doing the books for the restaurant, found a minor discrepancy in a wine supplier's invoice. A case of premium South African Pinot had been delivered, but not ordered. The attached note, on the supplier's letterhead, read simply, "A taste of home. Compliments of the management." She showed it to Dyun. His blood ran cold. The supplier was new, vetted by Tai, but the selection, Jinho knew Christina's background, her preferences. This wasn't a random gift. It was a fingerprint. "Change suppliers," Dyun instructed, his voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow." "Dyun, what is it?" Christina asked, her eyes worried. The shadow of the mill was never far from her either. "Probably just an overzealous sales rep," he lied, pulling her into a hug. But over her head, his eyes met Tai's across the room. The message was clear. The perimeter had been breached. Not with force, but with memory. The final, chilling proof came on a rainy Tuesday. Dyun was walking back from the market, a bag of fresh mandu wrappers in hand for that night's special. A sleek, black car, unfamiliar, pulled up slowly beside him. The rear window slid down halfway. He stopped, his body coiling, his free hand instinctively moving toward the small of his back where he no longer carried a weapon. From the dim interior, a familiar, smug voice drifted out. It was slightly altered, strained, as if speaking through pain or permanent damage, but unmistakably Lee Jinho's. "The restaurateur. It suits you. The apron is a better look than the bloodstains, I must say." Dyun said nothing. He just stared, committing the car's details to memory, his gaze trying to pierce the tint to see the man's face. "Don't look so tense, Hyung," Jinho crooned, using the old, familiar honorific like a poisoned dart. "I'm not here for a war. I got what I wanted. Freedom, fortune. I'm just nostalgic and curious. How long can a tiger play at being a house cat? The world you left behind, it has a gravity, pulls, and your new little world, it seems so fragile. A gust of wind, and poof, the window began to rise. "Give my regards to your beautiful wife." And your mother. I think of them often. The car slid away into the traffic, leaving Dyun standing on the wet pavement, a cold, pure fury icing his veins. It wasn't a direct threat. It was worse. It was a reminder, a statement that Jinho considered himself outside of Dyun's reach, and that their happiness was a spectacle he could watch, and potentially shatter, whenever he chose. Dyun walked home, the Mandu wrappers forgotten. The penthouse, which had felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a glass house. He looked at Christina, who was humming as she set the table. He looked at his mother, dozing by the window. The fear he thought he'd banished returned, not as a storm, but as a deep, freezing undercurrent. That night, after Christina fell into an exhausted sleep, he went to his study, a peaceful room with books on history and cuisine. He opened a hidden panel in the bottom drawer of the desk, a security feature from the penthouse's previous paranoid owner. Inside, clean and oiled, lay a single, unregistered pistol and a spare magazine. He didn't take it out. He just looked at it, the symbol of everything he'd left behind. Harmony was not the absence of noise, he realized. It was a melody constantly defended against the dissonance of the world. Jinho's whisper had just introduced a discordant note. He closed the panel quietly. He would not let the past reclaim him. He would not become the monster in his own home again. But as he returned to bed, sliding in beside the warm, trusting form of his wife, Dyun Lee made a silent, solemn vow. He had built this life with his hands. He would protect it with every fiber of his being, with the skills of the old world and the heart of the new. The tiger might be living in a house, but its claws had not been removed. They had simply been sheathed, and for his family, he would unsheathe them without a moment's hesitation. The peace they had won was not an endpoint. It was a vigilant, cherished state of being. And as he watched the rain streak down the window, reflecting the city's neon, he understood that their story was not a fairy tale with a definitive happily ever after. It was a daily choice, a continuous act of creation and defense. And for Christina, for Pina, for the life growing secretly within her that she hadn't yet told him about, it was a choice he would make every second of every day, forever.